So hello and welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us for the first webinar of the iSamples 2015 Fall Webinar Series. iSamples, which stands for the Internet of Samples in the Earth Sciences, is an EarthCube NSF-funded research coordination network that seeks to dramatically improve the discovery, access, sharing, analysis, and curation of physical samples and the data generated by their study for the benefit of science and society. Our first speaker, Kerstin Lehnert of the Lamont-Doherty Earth Observatory, who is also a PI on the project, will give us an update on the status of iSamples and plans for the future. Our second talk will be given by Paul Kimberly of the Smithsonian Institution National Museum of Natural History. He will speak about digitization, past, present, and future. Just a quick note about the format of these webinars. Each presenter will be given 20 minutes, and then there will be approximately 10 minutes at the end of each presentation for questions. If you have questions, please type them into the chat box during the presentation. Kerstin, we will begin with you. I will pass the screen sharing to you, and you may begin when you are ready.
Okay, I hope you can all see my screen by now. Welcome from me as well, and thanks, Megan, for the introduction. We have had over the past year that the iSamples Research Coordination Network was going on a number of requests to run webinars in order to inform the community about activities or services or other developments relevant to cyber infrastructure and physical samples. So this is our first session, and we thought it would be good to start this off with a very brief introduction to iSamples and to the activities that have happened since the project started on September 1st, 2014. The project was basically inspired or conceived because of the relevance that samples have in our science across many disciplines, actually most disciplines in the earth sciences, and the necessity that these samples and the data that are generated by the study of these samples are fully integrated with digital data infrastructures and other cyber infrastructure developments. The objectives of the iSamples Research Coordination Network, or RCN, are to advance the use of cyber infrastructure in making the physical samples and sample collections, as well as the data generated on them, more accessible, being better shared, curated, and preserved for a long-term impact on science, on the earth sciences in general. This has basically two aspects. We want to ensure the preservation, discovery, access, and sharing of samples and sample-based data, both to make our science more reproducible and to have a longer-term impact with the resources such as samples and data that we generate in our science. The goals of the iSamples RCN are first to actually bring the community together across the many disciplines, subdomains that are working with physical samples and develop a shared vision, a common idea of where we want to go with an internet of samples in the earth sciences. In order to actually better link up physical samples and collections with digital infrastructure, we need to converge on and build consensus on practices or basically related to the identification, to the description, citation, and registration, online catalogs, and so on of samples that then can be adopted across the very diverse stakeholder community that we have in iSamples, which ranges from researchers, repository curators, museum curators, to publishers, to funding agencies, and to computer scientists and software engineers. We also want to enhance broad awareness and broad access to resources that already exist to advance preservation, access, and management of samples. And these resources are both in the physical world, in the form of repositories and museums, as well as in the form of data systems or software tools that support the management of samples. So in year one, we've done quite a number of activities. We've had a very engaged community that has been growing over time, and I'm just going to run briefly through this list of activities that was completed. So the first activity last fall, now a year ago, was a stakeholder alignment survey that Joel Kutcher-Gershenfeld from Waymark Systems is done in collaboration with the iSamples Steering Committee. There was a lot of data collected, quantitative and qualitative information. We had 280 respondents to the stakeholder alignment survey, and we can make accessible the link. The publication about the results of this survey is still in work. There was a lot of interesting insights, and I've only pulled out sort of the most relevant for the iSamples community, that there is very common agreement that physical samples, the sharing of physical samples is important, and the preservation of physical samples is important, but neither the sharing nor the preservation are easy to achieve. These are so-called flower diagrams that Waymark has developed, and basically they just show the more, I don't want to go into details, but the greener the flower is, the more positive the response to a specific question is, or as you see on the right side, lots of yellow, orange, red colors show that there are way more negative responses. At last year's AGU fall meeting, we ran a very successful early career workshop, a forum. It was an hour and a half long lunch meeting. We had 60 participants across from undergraduate students to postdocs and junior faculty there. And the important aspect was that this forum actually generated quite a bit of interest in this early career community, and we recruited a number of early career scientists that have since then been very involved in the iSamples initiative. 5 of the participants of the early career forum also came to our iSamples kickoff workshop. This workshop took place in January of this year with 53 participants across many different domains, as you see, from paleoclimate and paleobiological samples to the igneous metamorphic petrology world, soils, geochronology, and so on. We had computer scientists there, library scientists, representatives from data facilities, specifically those dealing with sample-based data. We had a number of curators from NSF-funded core and sample repositories, from museums, and also from the NASA astromaterials collections at the Johnson Space Center. We had a representative from publishers, from the AGU there, somebody from the petroleum industry, and the good thing was that about a third of the workshop actually were early career scientists who contributed quite interesting perspectives to this workshop. The most important outcomes of the workshop were a governance that we established for the Research Coordination Network. It's not a very formal governance. It is a steering committee that works with the PIs on developing strategies, working towards the shared vision, setting priorities in our activities. And the second outcome was the creation of 5 different working groups that focus on various technical and cultural organizational issues, ranging from identifiers and metadata to physical infrastructure for physical samples. These 5 working groups have been very active, and I will get in a minute to some of the activities and accomplishments of the working groups since January. As I mentioned, the workshop was really great through the contributions from the early career scientists who brought very interesting perspectives and challenges of sample management, sample collection, storage, questions of sample ownership, of introducing new practices in well-established labs and so on. As you can see here, this is one of the slides that an early career scientist presented, basically emphasizing tensions that can arise in the lab where the young scientist wants to bring in new practices such as the use of the IGSN, but encounters resistance on that. As I said, since the workshop, the iSamples working groups have been meeting on a regular basis and have been working together on a number of activities. The chairs of these working groups have met on a monthly basis virtually at telecons, as has the iSamples steering committee. With respect to the achievements, so we have participated in a workshop that AAAS organized, funded by the Arnold Foundation, with focus on reproducibility in the field sciences. The workshop was co-sponsored by AGU and by the Ecological Society of America. Came out with a number of recommendations on practices of sample citation, sample access, if a sample is mentioned in publications, very much, as the title says, focusing on reproducibility of observations that are based on samples. There is a science policy forum written up in a draft version. It's still in the last phases of getting feedback from participants at that workshop that should be released pretty soon. The Working Group 1 co-sponsored a workshop together with the IGSN organization, the organization that governs the International Geosample Number. The workshop took place in September this year, so just very recently, about 4 weeks ago. It was focusing on developing a metadata kernel, core set of metadata that provide the profile or birth certificate of a sample, with also an effort to make this core metadata set applicable both for geological and for biological specimens. So we had participation of a number of information scientists from the biodiversity community, from the taxonomic data working group, GBIF, which was quite exciting to see that moving forward, because many of our samples are actually fossils, have a biological taxonomy to it, and we need to make sure that geo and bio samples are documented in a compatible way. A draft metadata kernel was developed during this workshop. The workshop was very successful, very productive. The beta version of this kernel will be put online on November 15, so in about a month. There will be a 4-week period for comments to be provided to the group that is taking care, that is drafting this metadata kernel, and in the future it will be available at schema.igsn.org. We're also using controlled vocabularies that have been developed by the Observation Data Model Project. Working Group 2 has compiled use cases. There was an iSamples focused session organized by Working Group 2 at the ESIP summer meeting within the Data Stewardship Group, and a survey for use cases has been developed by Sarah Ramdeen and Andrea Tomer, who are both heading this Working Group 2. The next thing is Working Group 3 that's the group focusing on communications, education, and training, is basically run by early career scientists, really great. We ran an iSamples session at the EarthCube All-Hands meeting. Again, at this, there was outreach at the iSamples ESIP meeting. We've started the webinar today, obviously, and the Working Group 3 has also created an ambassador program that is about to be released, and there's going to be more information on that ambassador program within the webinar series. It encourages early career scientists to register their samples and become a sort of a point of contact within their organizations, their institution, for questions regarding sample management and citation and all the other aspects. Working Group 3 has generated 3 pitch slides that the ambassadors can use, or anybody else, to take first steps in applying best practices with respect to sample citation, sample identification, and documentation. Working Group 4 focuses on architecture and workflows, and has been waiting a bit on the use case group, making progress so that they can build their architecture ideas around these use cases. They have been gathering use cases from repositories in the first place now, and as a collaboration between repository curators and computer scientist Jim Bowring from the College of Charleston, there is an ongoing project to develop software that will streamline workflows in repositories. Yolanda Gill from the University of Southern California has been working with us on building the iSamples Knowledge Hub, which provides information about repositories and their policies, and that will be linked up very closely with Working Group 5. There's also going to be a webinar on this iSamples Knowledge Hub coming up soon. Next events, we will have in just a few weeks an early career forum at the annual meeting of the Geological Society of America in Baltimore. It's going to be November 1. It's joined with the EarthCube C4P Research Coordination Network. And this is sort of the content. It will be a 3.5-hour workshop with tutorials, how to obtain and use IGSNs. There will be discussions about use cases. We will also have demos of ongoing developments or existing systems such as MacroStrat, and Yolanda Gill will be there to report on the geoscience paper of the future. But we want to leave a lot of time for discussions both among the early career scientists and between early career and senior scientists and curators and so on topics related to samples and other cyber infrastructure issues. We will have a town hall at the AGU fall meeting. It's not a formal town hall, but rather sort of informal gathering to give people an opportunity to find out more about iSamples and other activities related to physical samples. And we are already planning the second iSamples workshop, which will happen in January at Chapel Hill in North Carolina at the Renaissance Computing Institute, or short RENCI. And that workshop will focus on developing the shared vision for the Internet of Samples in the Earth Sciences. I think that was my overview, yes. So I think we take our usual approach in having questions into the chat, right, Megan?
Yes, that was great. Thank you, Kerstin. That was almost perfectly on time. So if you have questions...
Almost. I think I did a little bit too long, but we started late.
Okay, well, if you guys have any questions, please put them in the chat box. While you're typing in your question, I do have one here already. First, is there a group that is addressing rescue of databases or information of sample data from individual researchers that are nearing retirement?
No, that is a really good idea to address that. We should be figuring out if one of the existing working groups can address that. I mean, in some way, working group 5 is not only focusing on physical infrastructure, but also on digitization of collections and rescue of the physical samples. So maybe it's something to think about there. But maybe it would be a great suggestion to establish another working group that focuses on that. Because I can see, as having dealt with a lot of sample-based data sets and with the registration of collections into the system for Earth sample registration, that is a big concern that many investigators or small institutions have databases that they abandon and are not possible to maintain. Great suggestion.
So Paul Kimberly, who will speak next, actually mentioned in the chat box that the NMNH is working on this, and he'll talk about it in his presentation.
Oh, awesome.
One final question, and then I think we should move on. Is there a plan for different communities, such as paleontology, to develop specialized metadata fields?
In some way, that is being addressed through the C4P activity, the Research Coordination Network, which is obviously very closely connected with iSamples. There's a lot of discussion on metadata for samples. We actually ran a workshop in May 2014. That was the first C4P workshop that looked specifically at metadata for paleobiological samples and taxonomies. And there's a clear recommendation to use taxonomies that are provided in a data system. I mean, it's a software called Specify, but we should really do a better job, I think, of putting that information up on our website. I think there is a link already on the C4P EarthCube website to the workshop report. So that could provide some guidance. But the Yes, I mean, this is a really important question, in that different communities clearly need to extend what this core metadata set currently contains with all the relevant metadata that they provide. And maybe we should actually at some point include in the webinar series more detailed presentation about how this is envisioned with the IGSN and having core metadata and then the extended metadata profiles at community-based registration agents that work with their research community on establishing these extended metadata profiles.
Okay, thank you, Kerstin. I think it's time that we should move on to Paul Kimberly's talk about digitization, past, present, and future. So, Paul, I will pass the screen share to you, and you may begin when you are ready.
There, now can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes, but we cannot see your screen.
Okay, well, we'll keep working on that one then. I got a message to share, and I clicked on it, but...
There's a quick start tab. The middle square says share application.
Got it. All right. How's that?
Great.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I just want to say up front, my talk's a little bit NMNH heavy and a little bit biological heavy, but I'll explain that a little bit as I go along. So we'll talk a little bit about the National Museum of Natural History, our collections, and then get into the digitizing of natural history museum collections around the world. So I don't know if everybody knows this, NMNH consists of 2 buildings. We have a big storage facility about 8 miles out of town, and just departments and archives and other facilities around the world. So it's a big place, and we store a lot of stuff. And so my job as digitization manager is to figure out how to do this faster. So we have 2-dimensional objects, 3-dimensional objects, recordings, you name it, we've got it. How much do we have? Our best guess, 128.9 million. I won't get into that. We boast to have the largest natural history collections in the world. And what does 128.9 million look like? It's pretty impressive. Our facilities, the one in the middle, the high bay, those are all whale bones. And so you can imagine, how do you digitize that? You can put it in the database, you can document it, but is there a need for taking a picture of every one of these specimens? So we'll get into what is digitization. So I thought this would be an important graph as we're looking at, and talking to you who are focusing on the earth sciences. Our mineral sciences department, which is our rock and ores, meteorites, gems and minerals, is only 1% of our collections here at Natural History, where paleobiology actually makes up 30%. Now, mineral science, not only because it's a smaller collection, they've done really well at digitizing, of making sure things are databased. And even with the lessened resources as the years go by, they're doing a pretty good job of keeping up with the new stuff coming in. So there's not a whole lot of legacy collections that need digitizing. Unlike paleo. So paleo doesn't have nearly as much digitized, but I'm starting to work with them. Recently got some equipment. So what is digitization? I think following up on Kerstin's talk, it's generally the creation of metadata. So a digital descriptive record about the specimen, the item, creating digital surrogates, so images of images that locality collections in a rock collection would be something of use to digitize, but not all the rest of the granites. say. With some of the biological collections, it becomes a little bit more, it makes a little more sense to image more individual specimens. And we'll take a look at some bumblebees in a little bit. So the transcription of printed data, transferring analog information, is basically taking things and making them digital and getting access to their metadata for sharing. And it is not simply taking digital imagery. I have this battle constantly with people who think, well, we don't need to take just a pretty picture. And that isn't what we're doing. What's most important when we take images is the label. So we take an image of the label along with the specimen. So we've already digitized 6.8 million database records, and that's been in the last 55 years, I think is what it is. 39.6 million objects are represented by those 6.8. So there's a jar of fish is 500. It's one database record, and its specimen count is 500. So that's where we get the difference there. We have approximately 950,000 images of our specimens. And at this point, 6.6 million records are available on our website. So in the past, I love this photo. I have no credit for it or what year it was. I'm just going to whip right through this. Basically, we put our first computer, a mainframe, online in the late 60s. And by 1970, we had 10,000 records. They thought it was so great. NMNH created their own database, and bam, now we're in 2014, or 2015, actually. And so I think the take-home message from this is that we had a slow beginning, and I have a chart coming up that shows how much quicker we're actually digitizing these days. So this is the old way. We had a great inventory that came through. They wanted to inventory everything, and the gal sitting here is the way that they would do it. So this is back in the late 70s. She would actually write the information from the specimen label onto a sheet. Those sheets would be handed to, back then, secretaries who actually just did the data entry, and that's all they did was sit there all day and enter the data that the technicians were putting on the sheets. So today, how do we do it? In 2012, we formed a digitization steering committee because everybody was doing it differently. There was no coordination. We were doing what we were calling boutique solutions to digitizing and not really looking at mass digitization and economies of scale and then priorities. What should we digitize first? So here's one of the graphs that I referred to. In 2013, this is where we actually had a contractor get a handful of databases off of late career scientists' individual PCs, and we uploaded them into the database. So we had a big jump between 12 and 13, and we continue to do that and encourage this to happen so that that data is not lost. It's becoming easier to do. When we first started trying to do this back in the mid-2000s, it was pretty difficult, but it really takes somebody to go and sit down at the desk with this staff member to get the information off of it and actually get it into our database of record. Another reason why our number has gone up, we hired a set of 6 roaming technicians, and their job is to get things into the database. That's been very successful. Since they started 3 years ago, they've created almost 200,000 new records in the database. So we're looking at that. And if you want to take a look at this, it's at collections.nmnh.si.edu/search. So we're trying to think of things by type, not department. Because some departments have wet collections, some have dry. Only one has tin collections. But so trying to think of economy of scale. Then once again, the labels are the most important part of any image that we take now, so that they can so that you can get the information from the specimen label into the database, which was then it's ready for sharing. Here's a close-up of the high bay with the whales. just sort of showing you what we're up against. How do you get label information out of a wet collection? I was down at the Australian Museum with Paul Flemons, and we went to their invertebrate zoology collection manager and had a brainstorming and walked away shaking our heads. That one's going to be tough. And then smaller, flatter 2D objects. Another one of our challenges are our microscope and histologic slides. A lot of them are actually type slides and are starting to age and degrade. We've got upwards, if not more than 5 million of those to tackle. And so we're looking at the latest of the scanners. They're getting better, but I'm not sure that which is out there is it yet. We have field notes and ledgers that need transcription. Our Office of the Registrar has 500,000 documents that are our proof of registration that we own the document. And I've got a contract out for this to make this happen. There are no digital copies. And this way, our technicians will be able to access the accession information from their computer rather than having to physically get up and go down there, which is difficult for the folks who work out 8 miles down. So I have to do statistics for the museum every year. And in the last 5 years, we started actually giving our records a quality number. So a 1 is there's no database record, 2 is below standard, it only has minimal data, 3 is a standard, and 4 is above standard. Now, as we looked, we have multiple collections in the building, and so everyone was actually able to make up their own rules for this data that were being created. So we estimate that it'll take 38 million records to represent the 128 million specimens. And we only have 17% of that. Although, you know what, that number doesn't look right. It should be more like 28%. Check those numbers, sorry. So again, we estimate it'll take 38 million. That means we have about another 29 million to go. Oops. And it's taken us 50 years to get to that 6.8 million. However, we've done 2 or 3 million, I think, in the last 10 years. So we definitely have increased our speed, but we still do have a long way to go. So how are we going to get there? Where's the future? The shot of the bumblebee was a rapid capture project we'll talk about momentarily. And so it's basically by ramping up workflows and purchasing or contracting out with more automated technologies. So we see the conveyor belt down here, and those are botany sheets that are going through. This is a little conveyor belt that had bees on it, and it would take the image. And again, all of these have their data. And then this one down here is actually for research quality images. So that, at least here at Natural History, we take 7 different angles of an object and in high resolution so that it can be used for research rather than loaning the specimen out. And we just had that demoed here a couple weeks ago. So in the future, we're going to prioritize projects based on a research question, not on who's the best at getting money or who talks the best, and we're trying to use our statistical data at the end of the year from all this digitization to help us create those questions and priorities. Rapid capture projects we'll talk about in a minute. Again, greater automation, digitization, and cataloging. They've actually become dependent upon each other. If you're going to catalog something, you're going to digitize it, right? Because you're going to get it in the database. If it's deemed necessary, you'll create an image of it. So the creation of digitization centers, they're starting to pop up. I have proposed that we create one here on increased crowdsourcing. We'll take a look at that in a minute too. How am I doing on time here? All right. So here's a picture of Digivol's Volunteer Digitization Center. So Digivol is the digital volunteers at the Australian Museum in Sydney. Paul Flemons is the director of that facility. So they bring volunteers in, as you see sitting here. They have 5 workstations in about 1,000 square foot space. And they bring the collections down to them, and these folks prepare the images and their labels, take an image, put them back. And then the digital side of that, they have a transcription center that we'll take a look at. That's all volunteers as well. Last year we did a rapid capture with bumblebees. So we did 44,047 specimens in 8 weeks. And you see down in the bottom left, the tiny little labels that need transcribing. There was also code written that read the barcode and then put that into the data, into the metadata. And we're really starting to go more towards barcoding specimens when we touch them, when we digitize them. So here was a couple of my technicians who did this for 8 weeks. And, you know, it was really good. We did something faster than we ever did, but it was staff intensive. It was expensive. It cost a lot of money. And that didn't include the 8 technicians that we supplied. So 2 of the technicians were, where the orange are, the data processing and the digital imaging. That was a contractor who we brought in. And we sat down and did it 8 hours a day. At some point I decided to join them, and so that I could see just how bad it was. So it's an unsustainable pace. You would really need a team twice that size so that they could do it just part-time. And then I did a back-of-the-napkin calculation. In the 8 weeks that we did this, the photographer walked across approximately 9 miles, 14.5 kilometers between tables, around and around. So you need to really look at the workspace, because if I would have made that gray circle smaller, he would have walked less and we would have got more time. So looking at workflow is very important during digitization. So this is our next one. Actually, I have a meeting for this tomorrow. Our botany department is going to digitize 500,000 herbarium sheets in 6 months. And when it's the flat 2D objects, it's a lot. You know what? Did I point out the cost? I missed the cost here, right? And this process is also really expensive. It's $450 to $850 a specimen, so it's very costly. Very staff intensive, and it takes a long time. And then another thing that we're talking about is once you create all this data, then you're responsible for it for eternity, and that cost only continues to go up as well. So the conveyor belt on the right, this was I think this was Naturalis, where they actually had 3 or 4 conveyor belts running. It's less expensive, and it's a heck of a lot faster. So crowdsourcing, we're going to increase in crowdsourcing. The Australian Museum has the Digivol. It's part of the Atlas of Living Australia down there. And so the Smithsonian, we put ours online a couple of years ago. Notes from Nature is through the Zooniverse project and University of Florida down in Gainesville. And so people come to the site and choose what they want to transcribe. They transcribe the data into the website, we proof it, and then we get it into the database. But it's not going so fast, so what we decided to do, and here's a plug, is have a crowdsourcing global blitz. So we're having a 4-day global blitz, transcription center blitz next week, Thursday through Sunday. WeDigBio.org. Check it out. I think it's going to be pretty cool. We're organizing the 6 biggest transcription centers around the world to do a 4-day blitz at the same time, and we'll see what happens. I want to thank Rebecca Snyder. She did the draft of this, and NMNH staff, iDigBio, and Paul Flemons. So that's it. Do you have any questions?
Great. Thank you very much, Paul.
Mm-hmm.
The presentation has already resulted in multiple questions. So for the rest of you, please type in your questions in the chat box while I'm asking. First of all, Paul, are the record quality criteria that you showed a standard in the collections community?
No, not in the collectors community, but in our building. As far as I know, other museums have not adapted that, and but they are very interested in it.
Okay. Is the volume of data for digitization a problem, and if so, how do you deal with that?
Yes, that's actually a really good question. The volume of data that we create every day with the bees was 360 images a day, and our system could barely keep up with it. And for botany, what we're starting tomorrow, there's going to be thousands, 5,000 a day, I think, is what they're thinking. And so we actually have to then work with our IT folks to broaden the pipeline. And so we're pushing the envelope with this. Once the data are up into the database in the transcription center being transcribed, the volume of data isn't that much of a problem. What is a problem is getting that data back into our database out of the transcription center. So I'll kind of stop there on that one, but I've been working on a program that helps us with that.
Okay. You mentioned before that you're going to prioritize samples based on research questions.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Let me go back up to this slide. So in comes the Digitization Steering Committee. What we were tasked with by the Smithsonian Institution was that all the 18 museums had to come up with unit digitization plans. And so the 8 departments on the right of the screen sent representatives to the Digicom, and everyone, they were data managers, and there were no curators. And so the level of priority, the way that things were prioritized for the first 3 years, we're now in year 3 of that unit digitization plan, were based on a collections person's perspective, not a research person's perspective. And as the realization of how expensive it is to digitize is falling upon us, we all agree that we need to reach out to the research staff, to the scientists, and have them tell us that if you digitize the bumblebees, I can answer this question. And then those types of digitization projects rise to the top. Now, don't get me wrong, our type collection, our wet fish type collection, so it's the jars of fish, needs to be digitized for preservation. So we also look at that as a priority as well.
Thank you. So getting back to what a previous person asked with respect to sample rescue, what samples or collections does the NMNH accept from investigators for long-term curation?
Just about anything and everything, and I mean that. We don't turn a whole lot away.
Okay, let me check and see if there are any more questions. All right, here's one more. Have you had to deal with migrating or upgrading to more updated systems, and do you have any words of wisdom or warning about that?
Yes, we. Where's that slide? Back up here. We have gone through several systems since the 1960s. So 67 was our first one, 70 was our next one, 85 was the third, and then in 02, we started going live with Knowledge Engineering's Electronic Museum, which is a natural history focused database. And man, have an exit game. If when you're building a system and it needs to have a couple of things: the ability to store multimedia as well. So to actually inside the database hold your imagery, your recordings, your scientific data, not just the metadata record for the object, and then yeah, make sure that as you're building it, you're thinking about, okay, 20 years from now when we want to go to another database, keep that in mind.
Great. And finally, can you talk a little bit about to what extent you think that the digitization situation at the Smithsonian, the NMNH, is specific to your organization? You know, how do you relate to others elsewhere in this effort? You know, are you more fortunate in some respects, or what can you say about that?
That's a great question, because a year ago today I wouldn't have been able to answer it. And just in the last year, data managers and digitization managers are starting to meet around the world. So I was invited down to Canberra for a digitization meeting, and it was Natural History London, me from the Smithsonian, University of Florida's Natural History Museum, the Natural History Museum of Florida, the Australian Museum, the Atlas of the Living Australia. So what we did is we all got together, and this is actually where this talk is born out of, was that we got together, we talked to each other, and what resources do we have, how do we do it, what are your tools, and we found that 95 to 99% we do the same thing with relatively the same resources. So we're huge and looks like we have a whole lot of resources, but we can't get it done any faster than someone who's half our size with half the resources. So it was a great revelation this past year, and it was, we also decided that we will definitely be using for biological data both GBIF and iDigBio's data portal to share data. And China was the one, Natural History from Beijing was there, and they're still struggling with the ability to share, but would like to.
Great, very interesting. All right, well, I think we should probably wrap up. Thank you to both of our speakers. For everyone, so that you know, these webinars will be archived on the iSamples YouTube channel and linked to the iSamples website for future viewing. Please join us for our next webinar, which is in 2 weeks on Wednesday, October 28th at 4 p.m. Eastern. And we look forward to seeing you all then.
Thank you.